It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Rob States. He is an MIT scientist. He even helped develop the little chips that are inside the RF instruments. He knows what smart meter. Oh, you didn't? That's what I'd heard. Anyway, he knows. He knows guys who did. So he knows what those chips can do, and he knows what their capability is. And he has been, if you go on YouTube and click the dark side of smart meter, you will hear him giving a wonderful hour presentation, because this one we're going to have to cut short, as we are all of our speakers for the rest of the afternoon. But we have heard Rob before, and we're just very impressed with the information he has. So he's going to give you the dark side of smart meters and how this comes in with Agenda 21 and their entire goal to control every aspect of how man interacts with the environment. And of course, our use of energy is one of those main goals. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rob States.
I've been told to shorten it up, so any questions? Engineers are very literal about these sorts of instructions. So there's no clue why Orlene invited me here, because I've been an activist for 30 years and I am a flaming, liberal, tree-hugging guy from a tribe, and I am delighted to be in your company. And my tribe is delighted to be united with you guys. We have the same vision of the future, and anybody that tells you different is coming right out of the ruling families and trying to divide and conquer, and I'm sorry, it's not working anymore. No one in this room thinks that when the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire and burned out of control for 2 weeks in the 1960s, nobody here thinks that was a good job, and nobody in my tribe thinks that was good. When somebody is dumping toxic waste in the ocean, nobody thinks that's a good idea. And when the Georges Bank is overfished and it collapses, nobody thinks that's a good idea. But the green revolution that you're hearing in Agenda 21 is BS. None of it is absolutely true. And when I saw Al Gore talking an inconvenient truth, one of my master's degrees is in fluid dynamics. I understand how to model the planet. And let me tell you, there's this much science in those computer models and this much fudge factor, and his assertions were wrong from the word go. I have to give it to him. It was a wake-up call. Some people did some things, but I'm on board with you guys. There is not a dime's worth of difference between what we're doing and what you're doing. And what has the smart meter done for us? When they slap one of those babies on the side of your house, you become an activist. In August of 08, I got a letter from my power company saying, congratulations. And I called them up and I said, I don't want one. And they said, you don't have a choice. And about 4 months ago, we got choice. I won't get a smart meter, I won't get a smart gas meter, and I will not get a smart water meter. 2 weeks ago, if you were in LA and you called the power company and you said, I don't want a smart meter, they'd have said, I'm sorry, you don't have a choice. And as of Thursday of last week, you now have a choice. And if you don't think that grassroots activism is doing a good job, I have another story for you. And it isn't just with smart meters. I'm talking to people all across the country. Because of that smart meter video, 200,000 views. That was the talk I was going to give to my town council when town council cut me off and said, no, we agreed to have you talk, but instead it's going to be PG&E who's not only going to talk, they're going to bring in 6 plants that during Q&A are going to say how great smart meters are. In my sleepy little burg, they were pulling out all of the stops, and that was 200,000 views ago. There are literally dozens of activists across this country. Let me tell you who they are. They're single moms. They're elderly. You name it. They are out of the woodwork. They're going, you know, I don't know anything about this activism stuff, but these smart meters are getting me aggravated. And today it's the smart meter. Tomorrow it's Agenda 21. After that it is all of the things that we see happening in our country. There is no one in your tribe, no one in our tribe that thinks the EPA, the administrative law of the FCC, of the any of that is good, and yet that isn't even mentioned in presidential politics. It isn't even mentioned in, oh good, I love this. Let's see if I can get this to be happy. Is it going to be, oh good. So we're all in agreement that the system is broken. And I would like to thank the ruling families for giving us smart meters because I have never seen a more unifying topic. My tribe communes with off-planet intelligences, and we've got channelers, and we've got all these nut bombs. And about 20 years ago, they were saying, you know, the future of your planet is dicey. You're headed for totalitarianism. And I'm going, you're darn tootin' we are, and I'm not too thrilled about it. And about 10 years ago, they started saying, you know, it's iffy. And I'm going, what do you mean it's iffy? These guys have all the bullets. There's no way. And lately, they've been saying, we're going to win. They're not saying when. They're not saying how. But I'll tell you, I have never seen more people waking up. When I was at MIT getting a master's degree in finance, I studied under Nobel Prize winners, people that were in the Kennedy cabinet, people that were in the Reagan cabinet. They never mentioned the Federal Reserve Corporation once. And you know, they knew that if they measured it, they'd be out. They did not mention it. But I stand in line at Safeway now, and every other person knows about that. And every other person is committed to, that's a big problem. And is it mentioned in the state politics? Is it mentioned in federal? Those guys have got a lot of guns and bullets, and they shoot you dead on the spot. And it's like, okay, right off the bat, we're not going to go for that. But everybody understands what the problem is. The problem is this diagram from the movie Thrive. Some of you have maybe seen it. 10 years ago, I would have been scared out of my brain to put something up like this. The top of that pyramid is a series of bankers, about 120 of them on our planet, that own currency. There are 8 owners of the dollar. These bankers own the lira, the mark, the yen, all of the Western currencies. So they have such a fantastic income from that business that they control banks and they control corporations and they fund all of the political campaigns. And as long as it's money driven, they win. And when California had a significant choice to bring in clean money campaigns, meaning that any candidate can make a choice, take the money from the lobbyist or take the money from government and run your campaign, the Rockefeller family successfully defeated it. This is David Rockefeller. I'm not going to bad rap this guy. I'm going to quote from his autobiography, which says, "Some believe we are part of a socialist cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political community, economic structure, one world, if you will." If that is the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. That is in his autobiography. If you do a little simple math on the back of an envelope, his daily income is somewhere in the range of $300 million. That's his daily income. If you do some simple math for the last 100 years, since they have roughly an 1/8 ownership, something like that, in the Federal Reserve Corporation, their family wealth is in the order of 10 trillion. The Rothschilds from Europe, a family wealth on the order of 100 trillion, based on some estimates done by some economists in Russia. So that money buys them doctors, scientists, engineers, lawyers, and all of the stuff that is crazy. When you hear about the green agenda being in Agenda 21, that isn't a green agenda. They are buying into stuff that scientists and engineers and lawyers learned in school. They're tying into that because they need the middle class to make trains, planes, automobiles, factories, the software, the whole ball game, okay? And the best lie is 90% truth. So they're basically saying we're going to stop the Cajaga River from catching fire, but what they're really doing is packing and stacking everybody. It's a lie from the word go. So what they have is a control structure that I liken to tree roots. That means there's a central stalk, and then there's a network that goes down, and we are at the bottom of the tree roots. We are surrounded by various controlling interests. There has to be an uninterrupted path from the tree roots all the way up the control structure. We are at the bottom. That is grassroots. How did Gandhi win? Grassroots. Nonviolent protest scares the living bejeepers out of these guys, and they are getting it in spades. This is another picture of the control grid, and I like that one. That's true, but it's confusing. What's important about this is it's a network of old boys. that once you're in this group and you show loyalty, they use you over and over again. Before I leave this subject, I have a comment to make to those people on DVD or those people here that are working for some of the alphabet agencies, and there's virtually at least one in every audience. These are all people that played the game by the globalists' rules. And they are now dead or worse. Take a look at Mike Connell, okay? He rigged the 2004 election. Bush lost that thing by 5 million popular votes. He lost the Electoral College by 2/3. One of the major defeats in presidential history. And thanks to Mike Connell, not only was the election rigged, but the polls up to the election were rigged. He also has done, various other computer things and died in a suspicious aircraft accident roughly a week before he was going to testify in front of a grand jury. Guy in the middle, Ron Brown. What Clinton did, a Republican, Clinton a Democrat, right? He transferred ownership of military technology from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce. Before, and there's Ron Brown, head of the Department of Commerce. Before him, the ICBMs in China were bore-sighted. That means they had a tube, they had a missile in there, and they sort of tilted the tube to hit the continental United States. They had the sophistication of a 4th of July firework, okay? What did Ron Brown help transfer at a price to Red China? Strap down inertial guidance systems, hypersonic nose cone technology, laser-guided gyros, pulse-hardened chips, all stuff you need to make your ICBMs work. And today they have state-of-the-art. They can hit a nickel on your sidewalk with an ICBM that's 4,000 miles away. There were 25 flag officers in various services that felt this was treasonous. They are all dead. The guy in the corner there, David Christopher Kelly, he manufactured bioweapons, very sophisticated, and some of them were genetically specific. One race gets it, the other race doesn't. Died under a suspicious suicide. Guy down in the corner here, Gunther Rustbacher, was the pilot that flew Bush 1 to the October surprise meeting and flew him back on an SR-71. He has been missing for the last 10 years. The guy in the middle there, Michael Rakonashudo, he is smarter than anybody in this room and possibly anybody in California. This guy is an absolute genius, and he wrote the back door to the PROMIS software along with other tricky things, and he's doing 20 years for a trumped-up drug charge. You cannot be a druggie and do that kind of programming. And the last guy down here, William Colby, who at one point was head of the CIA, and he died in a mysterious canoe accident. If you watch the movie The Firm with Tom Cruise, it shows you that you originally get that job, and it's plenty of money, it's plenty of freedom, and they're the nicest guys in the world. And it's only later that they pull the strings. And I've seen this happen to scientists, to engineers, to doctors. It is not just a little thing. It is pervasive across the planet. So let me give you a quick overview of smart meters. What is a smart meter? Well, this is your block for the last basically 100 years. This is your block on smart meters. And who has the on-off switch? A faceless bureaucrat in a utility. And my utility just got finished funding Prop 16. Okay? Basically, will be a monopoly forever kind of a proposition. They bumped off a bunch of, gave cancer to a bunch of kids in Hinckley, California, and they decided to cover it up. Okay? Do I want those guys with the finger on my button? I don't think so. This is your kitchen. And once the smart meter is in, there's a secondary feature of it called the Zigbee network. And once your kitchen is all outfitted with smart appliances, that's your kitchen on smart meters. And they can not only know to turn those babies on and off, but they know chapter and verse of which one you have, what it does, and the settings of it. And a smart meter enabled appliance can also be controlled remotely. That means that they've got an up and down switch on all of this stuff. Do I want my power company turning my devices up and down? Because what they say to you is, we're going to save you power by turning it down when the power is expensive and turning it back up when it's inexpensive. But let's suppose it's a spring day. Nobody's using electricity. Nobody's using natural gas. They're losing their shirts. And what do? They've got the switch. Oh, I don't think that's a good idea, and I'm not thrilled about that at all. This is your future kitchen on smart-enabled appliances. Eyes and ears in every appliance. There is a high bandwidth path between each of these devices to your smart meter and then off to the power company. And they've oversized the bandwidth on that by a factor of 100. Bandwidth is expensive. Why do they oversize it so much? These things are capable of watching you and listening to you with a minor addition of stuff that's dirt cheap. What is the cover story? And this is the same cover story that you see in the green cover story in Agenda 21, that they're playing into things that engineers and scientists and businessmen and accountants learned in school. They say, look, in the daytime, people use a lot of power, and at nighttime, they don't use very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and even things out. And so they say, look, the thing is only on 45 seconds a day. It's going to save 4 to 12% of energy. There's a whole list of things that they say are going to happen. And I don't have time to refute all these, but every one of them is complete hooey. The facts are, these things save zero. After you plug them in, they chew up 0.5% of the total power coming out of the grid, and they pollute the living daylights out of you RF-wise. So privacy. When I first did the smart meter video, and it's 200,000 people have looked at it, it showed that what you could do with a smart meter is determine what's going on inside of the house. Okay? Because I have a network of activists, they show me this this PowerPoint presentation from Florence, Italy, November 26th, 2010, where this guy was saying, here's some data that came from NIST. This is smart meter data. And they said, oh, look, here's when they turned on the fridge. Here's when they turned on their kettle. Oh, here's the toaster. Here comes the washing machine. Oh, look, the oven is preheating. Oh, now the oven is cooking. That is your diary, 24/7. They know what you do, they know when you do it, and what did they say to the to management? They said, you can sell the data. And there is money written all over that. Now, the real reason for doing it is control. And if you're a peace activist, they would like to know it, and they would like to take care of you, figuratively speaking. But management doesn't get that message at all. They say, look at who's making the big money. Google, Yahoo, okay? You're going to be in their business. You are, in AC Nielsen, they said, we really like barcodes, but because they tell us what you buy. And we really like loyalty cards because they tell us who bought it. But what we're really missing in our marketing equation is when, where, and how. And the smart meter gives them all of that. If you don't think that's worth a bundle of dough, I'd like to sell you swampland and you name it. So the first thing that we have to cover is RF radiation, which comes out of cell phones, it comes out of cell towers, and it comes out of smart meters. A smart meter has a 1-watt transmitter. Some of them have 3 watts, which is FCC illegal, separate question. But the average one has got a 1-watt transmitter. Your cell phone is a 1/4 watt, okay? So the power company says, well, you know, it's less. But that cell phone is A, right up to your head when you want it, and it is down and away when you don't. It is voluntary exposure. The RF radiation that comes out of your smart meter is involuntary. Here is the network. It comes out of one meter, it bounces around the network, and then it ends up at the utilities database. And the one on your house radiates laterally. It has a dipole antenna, and it primarily radiates laterally. And so 0.1% of the energy is actually data transmission, and 99.9% of the energy is flowing out. It's just flinging the energy out. And it goes through your house. If you are on the other side of that wall, and that's where your bed is, you're getting dosed 24 all the time you're sleeping. Huge amounts of RF dose. All involuntary. This is an example of how that transmission goes, because RF radiation travels just like sunlight, okay? And this gal is sitting in the shade on a sunny day. And so as you can see, The parasol is protecting her. So if you want to protect yourself against smart meter radiation, what do? You put up a shield. The bad news is the radiation also bounces. So you can see her. She's in the shade, but you can see her. And the reason you can is because the light hits the sand, the light hits the water, and it bounces back. And microwaves do that same trick. So in order to totally reduce your exposure, you have a large amount of shielding to do, very expensive. Now, smart meters are arranged in what's called a mesh network. Imagine a mesh, okay? And let's suppose the mesh looks like the picture on the left, which is water going down a drain. In your tub, the places remote from the drain are quiet. They're just sitting there. Nothing's really happening. But you go right up to the drain, and it's ferocious. And that's the data rate difference between what's happening on the edge of the mesh and what happens at the upload point. See that picture on the top right? That is an upload point, also called a data point, where one of the smart meters, about 1 in every 600, grabs the data that it gets, and it stuffs it up that pole, and the pole sends it off to a cell tower, and bang, its journey is done. But if you are one of the unfortunate people that is in the drain, you are receiving the data from 600 smart meters. Huge amount of RF load. And we know from insiders that they always put those in people that don't have a dog, that have a good, they don't raise a fuss, and often elderly, and there's no barrier to accessing it. So it's kind of like, this total crapshoot, but they've given the installers these rules to make it like, go smooth as silk. Oh, thank you for that. So what we know about the mesh network, the power companies knew, because in 2010, EPRI did a study. This is a public domain study. I've got it. I can email it to you. It shows the behavior of the mesh network and the elevated data collection you get at the central point. And yet still, we see these misleading information coming out of the PR and stuff that says, no problem, they're hardly ever on. But there's a huge difference between whether you're in the middle of the mesh and draining, whether you're on a sleepy outside. Now, this is one of the most misunderstood secondary problems with smart meters. Decades ago, all of the devices in your house and all the devices on the grid were relatively quiet. There were some motors, they're inductive, and they are slightly nonlinear. But all of the heating applications, like an incandescent light bulb and like an electric stove, those are linear loads. So the power gets generated hundreds of miles away and ends up where you are. And it's three-phase power, and if it's an entirely linear load, it shows up here, it gets used, and that's the end of the story. But as soon as you start putting nonlinear loads on, and in this case, I'm showing a switching mode power supply in a smart meter. The meter gets its power from a switcher that is on the grid. Okay? Power comes into the smart meter, it grabs some of it, and it gives you these pulses, 120 times a second. Okay? On the left, you can see, this is up on the top there is the high-pass filter that I used to cut down the 110 volt to accentuate the spikes. These are in every house that's got a smart meter. And on the other side is the same signal that is filtered that is not a smart meter. So those spikes go into come out of your smart meter, and they surround you. The entire power wiring in your house is subject to these spikes. So you are surrounded by this electromagnetic noise. And when this data was taken early on when I got into this, and this woman had gotten sick immediately on getting a smart meter, within hours. And I was going, what was it? And I scanned the meters, and none of them were on yet. It could not have been the meters. It could not have been the RF radiation. And she had RF radiating devices all throughout her environment, and she'd been living there 3 years, so she had tolerated the RF load up to now. But these spikes had some kind of magic bullet. They sensitized her, and she's RF sensitive. And what that means is, one of her membranes, and in this case the blood-brain barrier, becomes leaky whenever it's exposed to RF radiation. Her immune system triggers that and says, uh-oh, there's something in the blood that's not supposed to be there, and she gets a histamine response and an immune response. Very destructive. People who have asthma die from that. This is a very common overreaction of the immune system. That was why everybody died in 1918, overreaction of the immune system. And the most lethal bioweapons that are currently on the planet, they're overreaction of the immune system. Do not underestimate this. Once you're sensitized, you can't get away from them, because these travel, they're a very long wavelength, and so their mode of transduction is electrostatic. What do I mean by that? We have a dysfunctional family shown here, where little Susie is playing in the family pool, minding her own business, splashing along healthily, and her evil brother Eric comes by, lights a firecracker, drops it in the pool, and runs away cackling. Unbeknownst to her, the firecracker goes down and goes doesn't make any noise because it's underwater. It goes What little Susie experiences is all of a sudden there's a boop, a slight pressure pulse in the pool. That's it. End of story. After the pressure dies down, no further activity. Okay? Now, it doesn't matter where she is in the pool. Pressure's going to hit her. She could put a big plywood board between her and the explosion. Would that stop it? No, go right around the board. That is the nature of dirty power. It is low frequency, and it is electrostatically transmitted, and it is very difficult to shield. Here is a mesh network, okay? All of the smart meters have the same switching mode power supply. They are all pulsing on the same harmonic, and what that means is the entire grid is doing this 120 times a second. There's no place in town to get away from this. So people that are sensitive, as soon as they become sensitized, there are all kinds of places they used to tolerate that they can't go to anymore because their immune system is now on the lookout. Before you're sensitive to ragweed, you can play in this stuff. And as soon as you get sensitized, you can't get within a mile of it. It's the same situation with smart meters. And that entire class of people are now refugees in their own country. And the stories that I've heard are just unbelievable. But the grassroots action is making a difference. But it's not going to make a difference to this, because you have to have entire cities to opt out. And so far, Fairfax and a few others, that's about it. So in addition to smart meters creating dirty power, anything that's got a nonlinear load, like a VF drive on a motor, or cell towers, power supply, same thing. The last thing is ground currents. Okay? So what I told you was that if you have a linear load and you have the power plant 100 miles away, 300 miles away, it ships out three-phase power, it gets over to you, and it gets used up. End of story. But as soon as you put a nonlinear load on there, there is a current path that has to go from the place of use to the nearest inductor. So you see down at the bottom right there, there's the house, and there's some power poles, and then a ways away from them is a step-down inductor, okay? There, in nonlinear loads, there's a current path that goes through there, okay? And that's true of fax machines and computers, but it's true in spades of smart meters because they're all on the same harmonic. And so look at your house, this little x-ray vision of your house, and what is underneath your house? Water pipes that go for miles. They are conductive. Sewer pipes that go for miles. They are conductive. Gas pipes that go for miles. They are conductive. Okay? Power lines overhead that go for miles. They are conductive. And it is difficult to predict where these ground currents will go, but they could show up in your faucet, in your toilet. They could be surrounding you. And this is extraordinarily difficult to shield from. And you would have to put electrostatic gaps on all of the surfaces coming in. It's very expensive. And so far, we don't even know how to measure those. They're difficult to measure, they're expensive to shield, and smart meters are doing 0.5% of the total grid is now the same harmonic of that switching mode power supply. How am I doing for time? Am I over? Wrap it up. So what I have in this PowerPoint are literally dozens of health studies, and let me just cover the ones that you need to know about. This guy is Sam Millam. He graduated in the mid-60s with a prestigious medical degree, and his first and a degree in public health. And the first place he worked was the state of New York. And what he found was that if you lived in Rome, New York, the incidence of childhood leukemia was 8 times higher than any place else. And it took him 20 years to figure out. It was the 10 megawatt radar at the military base. The thing spins around like this, and it doses you And it's exact same kind of radiation that comes off a smart meter. It's intermittent RF radiation in roughly the same band. So he went on from there in the ensuing 20 years before he figured this out to do this pivotal study. What he did when he was up in Washington State, I think it was he found out that what you can do is get census data. And there is a comparison in census data between the death records of people that live in the city, people that live in the country. And what this allowed him to do was separate those two data sets and look at incidence and mortality of disease in people that were electrified, people that were not electrified. And this had hundreds of millions of data points, which means he was finding diseases that were in the one incidence in 100,000 and giving us statistics on what the electrification was doing from 1920 through 1950. He found a 10-fold increase in leukemia, a 4-fold increase in suicide, huge increases in insomnia and irritability and depression, huge increases in cancers, Hashimoto's disease, a wide variety of degenerative diseases. In other words, the same kind of dose we're getting out of our power system now has been shown conclusively to be hazardous to human health and all the stuff that we're used to. So all of these slides, this one is, all of these slides are various health studies, and this one tells you that you don't find out about RF problems until 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 30 years later. So to wrap this up, those smart meters on the left, they are violating their FCC license. The smart meter on the right, it's violating its FCC license. So far, no company has been sued for doing that, for those installations, which appear to be violating their law. USC 42, 1983 says, if you're a public servant and you violate my civil rights, you are liable as a private citizen. This was in 1871. There are tons of people who do this on a regular basis. And for us, this is an extraordinarily important law. Still on the books, hasn't been changed. The Energy Policy Act of 2005, it does not say you will mandate smart meters, even though the CPUC says so. It says they shall be provided to customers who request it. There's Reuters news coverage, shows you some. Anytime you guys are talking about sensitive stuff, turn your cell phones off, go in the backyard, because everything you write on email, everything you say on the phone, and everything that is said around your cell phones is not necessarily safe. I'd like to say namaste from my tribe to your tribe, and I want to emphasize, there is not a dime's worth of difference between the world you want and the world we want.
Good. He's great, isn't he? Cheer for Mike.